The frost had a way of biting deeper than teeth. 3 boys pressed their backs against the rough timber of the cabin wall, their breaths rising like pale ghosts into the pale dawn. Samuel, the eldest, wrapped his coat tight around Jacob's thin shoulders, though it left his own chest bare to the wind. Elias tucked his face into his arms, whispering about hunger, about how the cold seemed to crawl inside his bones. Behind them, muffled through the door, came the soft hum of Clara May Carter, their stepmother, stirring a pot that none of them would taste. Some stories begin not with a gunshot, but with silence so heavy it freezes the heart. This was such a morning. Samuel tried to be strong, tried to carry the weight that no boy of 12 should. He rubbed Jacob's arms, whispering promises he could not keep. Elias shivered, teeth chattering, cheeks wet with tears he tried to hide. The frost under their boots cracked like glass with every small shift of weight, as though even the earth had turned brittle against them. They dared not knock on the door, dared not raise their voices. To do so would invite her wrath, and wrath was colder than the dawn. Down the trail, a lone rider pushed his horse hard. Jedediah Carter had left early from the cattle drive, dust still clinging to his coat, his face lined with weariness. He thought of the warmth of home, of his son's laughter, of the smell of bread by the hearth. Yet as his cabin came into sight, no smoke curled from a chimney, no voices carried through the wind. A stillness settled over him like a warning. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching frost. His breath caught when he saw them, 3 shapes huddled against the wall, trembling. Samuel lifted his head first. His lips parted, voice breaking on a single word. Pa! It was not just a greeting, it was relief, it was shame, it was hope clawing out of despair. Jed's hands shook as he reached for them, not with cold, but with a grief so sharp it hollowed him out. He drew the boys into his arms, one by one, feeling the sharp edges of their hunger, the fragility of their frames. Rage rose in him like fire, but he held it quiet. The cabin door creaked open. Clara May stood framed in the threshold, apron neat, hair tied back, eyes hard as flint. They needed discipline, she said, voice flat as stone. You spoil them, Jed. They'll grow weak. Her words cut sharper than any knife. The boys clung tighter to him, as though her voice alone could send them back into the frost. Jed said little. His silence was heavier than anger, heavier than fists. Clara May's gaze faltered under it, yet her jaw stayed set. By dusk, whispers had already slipped down the dusty streets of town. In the saloon, men muttered over whiskey glasses. At the general store, women shook their heads, their voices dripping with pity and judgment. A cowboy can break wild horses, Sheriff Clay Hensley remarked, but can he hold a home? His words hung in the air like smoke. Mary Belle Dawson, standing by the shelves with a sack of flour, overheard. She said nothing, but her hand lingered over the tin can she held, her heart tightening for those boys she'd once seen chasing tumbleweeds down the lane. Night settled heavy. Jed sat by the fire, his sons wrapped in blankets close beside him. The flames licked the logs, casting shadows across the cabin walls. The boys' eyes, hollow with hunger and fear, stared into the light as though it might vanish. Jed stared with them, his hand resting on Samuel's shoulder, his mind turning with questions no cowboy's life had prepared him to answer. A man can mend fences, patch saddles, break wild colts. But how do you stitch together trust once it's torn? The silence gave no answer, only the crackle of fire, and the weight of a promise he was only beginning to understand. Mary Belle Dawson was the first to notice. A basket left by the Carter cabin door in the quiet gray of morning, fresh bread wrapped in cloth, a jar of beans, a handful of apples. She did not knock, did not linger, only left the food, and walked away, with her shawl pulled tight. When Samuel found it, he held the bread as though it might vanish in his hands. He whispered a thank you into the empty air, a prayer meant for whoever had listened. Jed watched in silence, his heart breaking at how quickly his sons learned to accept grace as though it were contraband. Small mercies arrived without fanfare, and they clung to them as if to life itself. But inside Jed wrestled with his own torment. Each night when the boys had fallen asleep by the fire, he stared into the embers, chewing the bitterness of regret. He had chosen Clara May, had thought she could soften the sharp edges of loss, had believed his sons needed a woman's hand. Now the truth sat before him, gaunt and trembling. His boys bore the weight of his blindness. Clara May's voice still sliced the air, shrill with disdain. You've weakened them, she spat one evening when he refused to send them into the cold again. A man who coddles boys will reap cowards. He turned from her, saying nothing, his jaw tight, his silence like a wall she could not scale. Strength was not in rage, but in refusing to let cruelty dictate his hand. Days stretched. The well became a place of quiet encounters. Marybelle was there often, her sleeves rolled, her hair pinned simply, her gaze steady but gentle. Jed would draw water, nod in greeting, and though their words were few, time seemed to slow. She once brushed dust from Jacob's cheek with a tenderness that made Jed's chest ache. Another time, she slipped Samuel an extra apple, smiling only with her eyes. It was not romance in the thunderous sense, but in the quiet way two wounded hearts learned to recognize each other. In gestures, not declarations, something began to stir. The breaking point came sudden as lightning. Elias, the middle boy, lingered by the door too long one afternoon, and Clara May's hand lashed out, striking his cheek. He stumbled back, tears spilling as Samuel caught him. Jed was there before the echo faded, his shadow filling the doorway, his voice low but unshakable, no more. The room stilled, the boys pressed against him, their fear laid bare. Clara May sneered, ready to defend herself, when another figure stepped in, Sheriff Clay, drawn by rumors that had swirled through town like smoke. The sheriff's eyes swept the scene, Elias with a red mark blooming on his cheek, Clara May's hand still trembling, Jed standing tall with his sons tucked against him. The silence stretched until Clara May's facade cracked, her words tumbling out bitter and jagged. But no one in that cabin believed her any more. The sheriff's gaze hardened. "I reckon a home's meant for shelter, not punishment." His words cut deep, not as judgment, but as truth laid plain. Clara May's pride shattered. That night she left with her head high, but her name in whispers behind her. When the dust settled, the Carter cabin held a new kind of stillness. Jed sat with his sons near the hearth, their bodies pressed close, their eyes searching his face not for discipline, but for safety. He looked at each of them and spoke with a quiet conviction. Never again will you be left in the cold. The promise wasn't loud, but filled the room like sunlight creeping through shutters. Marybelle came in the days that followed, not as a savior, but as a presence. She sat with Jacob while he tried to eat, listened to Elias's questions, and helped Samuel carry wood for the fire. She did not rush, did not impose. Grace came slow, like spring thawing the frost. Jed's heart, so long bound in silence, began to ease in her company. Their glances carried a language words could never hold. The town, once quick to gossip, softened too. Respect replaced scorn, as folks saw not a cowboy who failed, but a father who endured. In saloons and stores the talk shifted, of a man who had faced shame and chose dignity, of boys who had suffered and yet stood tall. And so it ended not with grand spectacle, but with the quiet beauty of survival. The dawn broke clear, the frost lifting from the ground. Jed stood outside with his sons, Marybelle nearby, and for the first time in many moons, the laughter of children rose into the morning air. Some stories close not with vengeance, but with mercy. And if you listen closely, you may hear their lesson, that love is not loud, nor is it proud. It is the hand that keeps a child warm in the night, the neighbor who leaves food without a name, the silence that holds back fury and builds something stronger. We measure a soul not by the storms it weathers, but by the warmth it dares to kindle afterward. So remember, dear listener, when life sets you out in the cold, trust that the dawn will come, and that somewhere, someone is building a fire meant just for you.